I never thought marriage could make you feel this lonely. Not suddenly, not loudly, but slowly, quietly, like someone turning down the volume of your life until you barely hear yourself anymore. My name does not matter. What matters is that I was a wife for 30 years. 30 years of waking up beside the same man, 30 years of cooking his meals, washing his clothes, listening to his worries, and standing beside him when life was heavy. And one day, he looked at me like I was someone he used to know. That day, I understood something painful. I had given him my youth, my strength, my patience, and somehow I had become invisible. When we got married, I was young and hopeful, not rich, not educated, but full of belief. I believed marriage meant walking together, even when the road was hard. I believed love grew stronger with time. I believed if you stayed loyal and patient, everything would be enough. In the beginning, we were not perfect, but we were together. We lived in a small house. Money was always tight. Dreams were bigger than reality. But I never complained. I learned early that my role was to hold things together. When he came home tired, I listened. When he failed, I encouraged him. When he succeeded, I stepped back so he could shine. People would say, "You're lucky, he works hard." I would smile and reply, "Yes, we work hard." But no one noticed the we. Years passed, children came, responsibilities grew. I stopped buying things for myself. I stopped resting. I stopped dreaming. Everything I did was for us. If he was stressed, I stayed quiet. If he was angry, I stayed calm. If he needed support, I stayed strong. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be seen. After 20 years of marriage, he started changing, not cruel, not unkind, just distant. He spoke less to me, looked at his phone more, stopped asking how my day was. When I talked, he nodded without listening. When I asked questions, he answered with silence. I told myself this was normal. Men get tired, life gets busy. So I adjusted again. I always adjusted. One evening, I sat at the dining table waiting for him. Dinner was ready. The house was quiet. He came in late. I smiled and said, "You must be tired." He didn't look at me. He just said, "I already ate," and walked away. Something inside me sank quietly. That night I lay awake thinking, when did we stop sharing meals? When did I stop mattering? By the 30th year of our marriage, the distance was no longer small. He stopped including me in decisions, stopped telling me his plans, stopped asking my opinion. He lived his life, and I lived around it. One afternoon, we attended a family gathering. People praised him, his success, his confidence. Someone asked him, "You're lucky to have such a supportive wife." He smiled politely, but did not look at me. That smile hurt more than any insult. The moment that broke me came quietly. We were at a store. The shopkeeper looked at me and asked, "Madam, is this your brother?" My husband laughed and said, "No, just someone from home." Just someone. 30 years, and I had become someone from home. I stood there silently, holding a bag of groceries, feeling smaller than I ever had. That night, I didn't cry. I just asked myself one question. How did I give my whole life and still end up a stranger? The years after that moment began to feel different. Not louder, not dramatic, just colder. I started noticing things I had ignored before, small things, quiet things. The way he no longer waited for me before eating, the way he answered my questions with short words, the way he looked past me, not at me. At first, I told myself it was my imagination. 30 years is a long time. People change. Love becomes calm, not exciting. That is what everyone says. But this was not calm love. This was absence. Mornings became silent. We used to drink tea together before starting the day, not talking much, just sitting across from each other. That small routine once felt like comfort. Now he drank his tea alone, sometimes outside, sometimes while scrolling on his phone. If I joined him, he stood up and left. Not because he was angry, but because he did not think about me anymore. That hurt more. I remember one morning clearly. I was standing in the kitchen making breakfast. He walked in, took his keys, and headed toward the door. I said softly, "Will you be late today?" He stopped for a second, then said, "Why do you need to know?" The question surprised me. I wasn't checking on him. I wasn't controlling him. I just wanted to know if I should wait. I stayed quiet. He left without saying goodbye. That day, something heavy settled in my chest. I realized I had started choosing my words carefully, not to upset him, not to sound needy, not to ask too much. A wife should not feel afraid to speak, but I was. At family gatherings, I became quieter. People spoke to him. They asked him questions. They praised his work, his confidence, his success. I stood beside him, smiling politely. No one asked me how I was. No one asked what I did all day. No one noticed when I stopped talking. Even he didn't. One evening, I tried again. I sat beside him on the sofa and said, "Do you remember our first house?" He nodded without looking up from his phone. I continued, "It was small, but we were happy." He sighed. "Why do you always talk about the past?" he asked. "Life moves forward." His words were not angry. They were tired. But they made me feel old, unimportant, left behind. I stopped talking. After that, I stopped trying. I cooked, I cleaned, I existed. I learned how to stay invisible. There were days when he did not speak to me at all. We lived in the same house, shared the same space, but felt like strangers. Sometimes I wondered if he noticed my silence. He didn't. One night I fell sick. Nothing serious, just weakness and fever. I lay in bed, hoping he would ask me how I was. Even one question would have been enough. He walked past the room, got ready, and left for work. He didn't look in, he didn't ask, he didn't know. I cried that day, not because I was sick, but because I was unseen. I thought about all the times I stood beside him when he was unwell, all the nights I stayed awake, all the care I gave without being asked. Now I felt foolish for expecting the same. The worst part was not the neglect. It was the feeling that I no longer had a place in his life. He made plans without telling me, he went out without explaining, he returned late without noticing I was waiting. I stopped asking. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone. He was laughing. His voice sounded lighter, the way it used to sound with me. I stood behind the door, listening without meaning to. "Yes, I'm free," he said. "No, I don't have to check." That sentence broke something inside me. I realized then he did not need my presence. He did not need my permission. He did not need me. That night, I sat alone at the dining table again. The food went cold. The house stayed quiet. I looked at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "When did we stop being us?" No one answered. I started sleeping earlier, not because I was tired, but because being awake hurt too much. In sleep, at least, I didn't feel like a stranger. Then came the day I tried one last time. I gathered courage and said, "Have I done something wrong?" He looked at me like the question surprised him. "No, you overthink too much." Overthink. That word followed me for days. I wasn't overthinking. I was hurting. But pain that cannot be seen is often dismissed. From that day on, I stopped expecting love. I stopped hoping. I told myself, 30 years is enough. Don't ask for more. But the heart does not listen to reason. I did not know then that something even more painful was coming, a moment that would finally force me to face the truth, a moment that would change how I saw my marriage and myself. I did not know when the breaking point would come. I only knew it would not be loud. Big pain rarely is. It comes quietly, like a truth you were avoiding, suddenly standing in front of you. For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing special, no argument, no shouting, just a simple day that changed how I saw my marriage forever. That afternoon, he came home earlier than usual. I noticed because the house was still filled with daylight. Normally, he returned after sunset. I was in the kitchen washing vegetables when I heard the door open. I felt a small relief in my chest. A foolish one. Maybe today would be different, I thought. Maybe today we would talk. I wiped my hands and walked into the living room. He was on the phone, laughing. Not the polite laugh he used with relatives, not the tired laugh he gave me. This laugh was easy, free. I stood there not meaning to listen, but the words reached me anyway. "Yes, of course," he said. "No, she won't mind." I froze. She won't mind. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I knew who he meant, me. When he ended the call, I asked softly, "Who was that?" He looked surprised, like he hadn't noticed me standing there. "A colleague," he said. There was no reason for me to doubt him, but something in his tone felt closed. Then he added, almost casually, "We're going out tonight." I waited. He didn't say we. He said we, but I wasn't included. "Who is we?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Some friends, work people." "Oh," I said. I waited again. He didn't invite me. He didn't explain. He didn't look guilty. It was as if my presence didn't even cross his mind. That night I sat alone again. I did not cook dinner. For the first time in 30 years, I did not feel like it. I made myself tea and sat near the window watching the streetlights turn on one by one. I realized something frightening. I was no longer part of his daily life. I was just there. A few days later, another small moment happened. He was looking for a document. I knew exactly where it was. I always knew. I went to get it for him and handed it to him. He took it without looking at me and said, "Next time, keep things where I can find them." The words were small, but they hurt. Not because he was rude, but because he spoke like I was a helper, not a partner. That night I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I felt. Lines on my face, tired eyes, hair pulled back without care. I wondered when I stopped being a woman and became only a role. The real breaking moment came a week later. We were invited to a distant relative's wedding. I prepared quietly. I chose my clothes carefully. I fixed my hair the way I used to when we were young. I wanted to feel present. At the wedding, people greeted him warmly. They shook his hand. They praised him. I walked beside him, smiling politely. Then someone asked him, "And who is this with you?" He replied without thinking, "Oh, she's from home." From home. Not my wife, not my partner of 30 years, just from home. People nodded and moved on. I stood there feeling something inside me crack gently, like glass. That moment replayed in my head again and again. She's from home. On the way back, the car was silent. The city lights passed us by. I finally gathered the courage I had been storing for years. I said quietly, "Do you still see me as your wife?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "You think too much." That was it. No reassurance, no denial, no care. Just dismissal. That night I did not sleep. I lay awake listening to his breathing. I thought about the girl I once was, hopeful, full in love, ready to give everything. I had given him my best years, my strength, my patience, my silence. And now I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. The next morning, something inside me changed. Not anger, clarity. I stopped trying. I stopped asking questions. I stopped waiting. I moved through the house like a quiet guest. A few days later, he said something that confirmed everything. He was talking about an upcoming event. "I'll be attending alone," he said. I asked, "Why alone?" He replied, "It's easier that way." Easier. I nodded. That single word told me everything I needed to know. I had become an inconvenience. That evening, I went into the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at our wedding photo on the wall. 2 young people, standing close, smiling with belief. I whispered, "We didn't plan this ending." But life does not ask for permission. That night, for the first time in 30 years, I slept in the guest room. Not as punishment, not as drama, but as acceptance. I needed space to breathe. Lying there, I asked myself the hardest question of my life. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anything in his life change? The answer hurt. That was the turning point. Not when he left, not when he shouted, but when I realized I had already been alone for a long time. After that night, something inside me settled. Not healed, not happy, just settled. Like water after a storm, when the waves stop fighting and simply accept the shape of the shore. I did not confront him. I did not demand answers. I did not explain my pain again. I had done enough explaining for one lifetime. The days that followed were strangely calm. He noticed my silence, but he did not ask about it. I noticed his absence, but I no longer waited for it to change. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing the same space. Mornings passed without words, evenings passed without questions, and slowly I began to understand something important. I had spent years trying to save a marriage that only one of us was still living in. I began doing small things differently. I woke up early, but not to please anyone. I cooked, but only what I wanted to eat. I sat by the window with my tea, not checking the time. For the first time in many years, my days were not shaped around his moods. That felt strange and freeing. One afternoon, while cleaning an old cupboard, I found a small box. Inside were letters, old ones from the early years of our marriage. Letters he wrote when he traveled for work. Letters full of words like, "Miss you," "Can't wait to come home," "You are my strength." I sat on the floor and read them slowly. Each word felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I didn't cry. I smiled softly, not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally understood something. People can love you deeply once and still forget how to love you later. That evening, he came home and noticed the letters on the table. He picked one up. He read it quietly. Then he said, "You still have these?" "Yes," I replied. "I kept them." He nodded and put them down. There was no emotion on his face, no regret, no memory. That was the moment I stopped expecting an apology. A few days later, something unexpected happened. He fell sick. Nothing serious, but enough to slow him down. For a moment, old habits tried to return. I almost rushed to take care of him the way I always had. Then I stopped. Not out of cruelty, out of awareness. I helped him, but I did not disappear into it. I gave care without losing myself. That balance felt new. One night, as he lay resting, he looked at me and said, "You've changed." I smiled gently. "Yes," I said, "I had to." He didn't ask why, and I didn't explain. I began spending more time with myself. I took walks in the evening. I spoke to neighbors again. I listened to music while cooking. I felt present. Not loved, but present. And presence was something I had been missing for years. One afternoon, I received a call from an old friend. She asked, "How is marriage life?" I paused. Then I answered honestly, "It taught me who I am even when someone forgets." She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Slowly, my pain changed shape. It stopped being sharp. It became quiet wisdom. I stopped asking why he changed. I started asking why I stayed silent for so long. And that question gave me peace, not guilt. One evening, while having dinner, he said casually, "I'll be traveling for a few days." Earlier, this would have hurt me. Now I simply nodded. "Okay," I said, no questions, no disappointment. He looked at me, surprised. Perhaps he noticed I no longer needed his presence to feel complete. The truth is, I never wanted to leave him. I never wanted revenge. I never wanted drama. All I wanted was to matter. And when that didn't happen, I learned to matter to myself. I stopped measuring my worth through his attention. I stopped waiting for validation. I started respecting the woman who gave 30 years of her life with honesty. That respect was overdue. One night, as I prepared the bed, he said softly, "You don't talk much anymore." I looked at him calmly and replied, "I said everything when it mattered." He stayed silent. So did I. I realized then, sometimes silence is not weakness, it is understanding. Understanding that not every story has the ending we imagined, but every life still deserves dignity. There was a time when I thought love meant holding on to promises, holding on to memories, holding on even when your hands are tired. But life taught me something different. Sometimes love means letting go, not of the person, but of the pain. After everything changed, my days became quieter. Not empty, just quieter. I stopped waking up with questions in my heart. I stopped waiting for footsteps. I stopped listening for a voice that no longer called my name the way it used to. Instead, I began listening to myself, to my breath, to my thoughts, to the woman I had ignored for 30 years. I learned how to sit with my tea without feeling lonely. I learned how to eat alone without feeling forgotten. I learned how to look at my reflection and not feel ashamed of the lines on my face. Each line told a story of patience, of sacrifice, of love that did not ask for anything in return. And I finally understood those lines were not weakness, they were proof that I lived honestly. One evening, while folding clothes, I found an old scarf, the one I wore during our early years. I held it in my hands and smiled, not with sadness, with gratitude. Because even though my marriage did not end the way I dreamed, it shaped me into someone strong enough to stand alone. He noticed my calm. He noticed my distance. One night he said quietly, "You don't need me anymore, do you?" I looked at him gently. "I needed you," I said, "for many years." He stayed silent. Then I added, "But now I need peace." That was the first honest conversation we had in a long time. No blame, no anger, just truth. We did not separate, we did not dramatically change, but something shifted. He respected my silence, and I respected my limits. That was enough. I realized something important. Not every marriage ends in separation, some end in understanding. And sometimes that understanding comes late, but it still matters. Today, when I look back on my 30 years with him, I do not see failure. I see effort. I see love. I see a woman who gave everything she could. And I forgive myself for staying longer than I should have, because I stayed with hope, not weakness. If someone listening to my story is hurting silently, I want you to know this. You are not invisible. You are not unimportant. You are not replaceable. Just because someone stopped seeing your value does not mean it disappeared. Sometimes people forget us not because we are forgettable, but because we were always there, strong, reliable, quiet. And the world often overlooks quiet strength. I learned to choose myself, not loudly, not selfishly, but gently. I learned to rest, to breathe, to forgive, without forgetting. Now, when I sit by the window in the evening, watching the sky change colors, I feel something I never felt before: contentment. Not because life is perfect, but because my heart is no longer begging to be seen. This is what 30 years taught me. Love should never erase you, sacrifice should never silence you, and patience should never cost you your dignity. If I could speak to the woman I once was, the young bride full of hope, I would tell her this: give love freely, but never forget yourself in the process. My story does not end with anger. It ends with understanding, with quiet strength, with a woman who finally knows her worth. And that is enough.